what is in the Blue Book by Chad Meister, Divine Revelation, the Old Testament part of it. I'm going to start off with the question that Sean asks at the end, because I've noticed that. I thought this chapter was extremely useful for those who had...
What was it on?
The reliability of the Old Testament.
Okay.
So that being the not just how do we know we have the original text from the original copies, or the original copies from the original text, but also what is that text actually saying, and is it true or historically accurate? I thought this was really useful for somebody that questions the historicity of the Bible and possibly even like the authority of the Bible, because I think this kind of brings into question, or not question, but it kind of brings to light the detail that has gone into the Bible, not only from a like Christian or a Jewish background, but also from a historical person looking at the Bible to use it as a reference. So I'm just going to start off with, like, I know a lot of people that would ask me the question, well, what about the Bible's trustworthiness, and how would we approach this subject of the Bible being trustworthy or not, whether or not it's true or historically accurate? And I feel like Chad here has done a really good argument with three main points, or three main like helpful ways that we can, or methods that we can see that the Bible is actually like historically accurate. The first way that he explains is where is it at? It's called biographical evidence, and that chapter, that little section starts on page 130, where I'm gonna read one of these quotes. But biographical evidence is basically the evidence of how accurate the scribes did things, like how meticulous they were with copying the original like text. You wouldn't do this with a fiction book. Like, you wouldn't be so accurate with a fiction book. It doesn't matter if you're a little off here and a little off there, but the scribes, like we talked about last night, were so meticulous with all these things. I'm just going to read a quote of Neil Lightfoot that Chad actually quotes in the book on page 130 and 131. It says, "They numbered the verses, the words, letters of each Old Testament book. They counted the numbers of times each letter was used in each book. Then they noted the verses that contained all the letters of the alphabet, or a certain number of them. They calculated the middle letter, the middle word, and the middle verse of the Pentateuch, the middle verse of Psalms, the middle verse of the entire Bible, and so forth. In fact, they counted almost everything that could be counted." So, in order to like be off, if they weren't accurate on it, that means the middle verse or the middle letter would be different, and the word found in the middle of the Bible, of the Hebrew Bible, is in Leviticus 10:16. So they know if it was in Leviticus 10:17, they did something wrong, and they would have to throw it all away and start over. So that's like argument number one. That was the biggest point that stood out to me. The second way that Chad Meister explains or proves, or highly influential way of thinking to argue the historicity of the Bible, is through something called internal evidence. I don't know, many of you might have heard of the JEDP. I really didn't really understand it until I read this, so bear with me. But it really explained it quite well, that this scholar, I don't remember his name, Wellhausen, doesn't, he... What is that word? Doesn't really think the Bible should be taken literally as like history. So he made up or has this way of determining how it was written, and he puts it into 4 different categories. The first category being Jowist, the second Elohist, the third Deuteronomist, and the fourth Priestly. And it's like each way, like the first 2 are like how the name of God is used is different, or something like that. He explains it on page 133 and 134. But that's not the main point out of this point I want to show. The main point is out of the internal evidence is on page 136, where it says on the last paragraph of what the Old Testament says about itself. Chad says, a further point that needs to be made regarding the internal test is that no crucial factual contradictions have been established within the text of the Old Testament. While there are no doubt apparent discrepancies, scholars have resolved most of them through historical research by careful textual analysis and by giving the text a fair hearing. So there are no like large contradictions in the Bible's theme or the Bible's like overall purpose. It's all, it kind of flows together. So it kind of, if it was fiction and not history, it wouldn't flow together so well. There would be differences in between the copies, and there would be differences in between like the thoughts if it was written by different people in different time periods. And the third point of the argument is archaeology, discoveries, or external evidence. There are really cool things that they have found that are outside the Bible and outside of the Jewish and Hebrew belief and outside the Christian belief that prove that the things in the Bible happened and that certain kings and characters and stories actually took place or could have taken place because of an outside source found in archaeology. One, which is one of the ones that stood out here because David is my favorite character in the Bible, is a monument that they found that was only inscribed 200 years after David's alleged reign. Okay. I'll read you this quote. However, the discovery of fragments from the 9th century BC monument inscribed that only 200 years after the alleged reign demonstrate, contrary to the minimalist critics, King David not only existed, but ruled a kingdom as well, as Biblical Archaeology Review reports. And then it goes into this quote about the report of the monument. It says, Abraham Byron and his team of archaeologists found a remarkable inscription on the 9th century BC that refers to both the house of David and the king of Israel. This is the first time that the name of David has been found in an ancient inscription outside the Bible. That inscription refers not simply to a David, but to the house of David, the dynasty of the great Israelite king, and it is even more remarkable. So they found this monument that showed that King David, one of these characters in the Bible, actually existed outside of Hebrew belief. So that's pretty remarkable and kind of establishes the historicity of the Bible. And then they have a cool chart of all different things that happened on 140 and 141, and it gets into the New Testament stuff. It was a really good chapter. I really liked it. And I think, like, I told my mom to buy this book today because I was like, my dad questions the Bible. Bible's like authority and historicity, and he just thinks it's a storybook. And I was like, wow, my dad would understand this stuff.
Yeah.
So it was really, really cool to read.
Cool. Yeah, we actually have good reasons, believe it or not. Not all just crazy. Thank you. This works. All right. What I want to work with you on now is Old Testament trustworthiness, and see what kind of progress we can make on that front. What do you say?
Yeah.
Who's excited?
Yeah.
Let's get a show of hands. If you had to become a Bible scholar, and your choices were Old Testament or New Testament, that's what you were going to be specializing in and studying and whatnot the rest of your life. How many of you would pick the Old Testament? Just talent. So
Yeah.
the rest of you would pick the New Testament.
Yeah, I'm on the fence. I have reasons for that.
Denise? No. No, we're not playing that game. We're asking you to. Oh, she's called the Old Testament boring.
Old Testament has a lot more stories.
What about you? New Testament?
I think the Old Testament, yeah, I think there's a lot more study as far as archaeology goes. Like
Uh-huh.
covers Egypt.
Ooh, I think it's in the.
I think I'd go Old Testament.
All right, so now we have 3 for the Old Testament. The Old Testament is the deep end of the pool, right?
I like Egypt.
New Testament, your feet are kind of like touching the ground. Do you want to come in? You can come in. What's up?
I'll bring the other 7 pieces and put it up there, and those who didn't
Fight
get
over it.
it.
Okay.
And Sean will be in charge of 2 of them.
I think the coolest part of the Old Testament is where I think it's Ezekiel.
Oh,
or-
Ezekiel's
No, it's Elijah.
deep.
It's Elijah who sends out bears to kill children. It's Elijah.
I like the New Testament because
Oh,
of
is it?
Which is why we don't make fun of bald preachers.
Yes.
Go ahead, Jesse.
everyone's making defense cases for the Old Testament. I like the New Testament because of the Roman history and the Roman Empire. Like, I love researching the Roman Empire. I think that would be the biggest New Testament thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I believe if you look at Jesus, right? You hate
All right, I'm going to have to call you to order now. Basically, I want to make 5 points. How do you feel about that? All right, so this is lecture 10, Old Testament trustworthiness. And the points I want to make relate to archaeology. I guess we can go like this way. Medical insight. I like that. That's a good phrase. Unflattering honesty. 4 is predictive prophecy. And number 5 is martyrdom. And if we can get through all 5 of those, we will be having a good day. Okay. Here's one of my problems. One of my problems is that I have so much on number 1, number 2, and number 3 that I don't think I'm going to, or sorry, 1, 2, and 4, that I don't think I'm going to be able to do much with 3 and 5. So let me just do 3 and 5 right now, okay? And unflattering honesty is basically like this. Before I write it down, let me just say it. I'll say it to you in my own words. Why would you leave all these embarrassing things about the heroes of the faith if you were making it up? You know what I'm saying? So write that in your own words, and I'll just put a couple of examples. Noah, God destroys the world. Noah escapes by the skin of his teeth. He's the only one, the first one ever in the whole history of the Bible to be shown favor, which is the idea of grace, right? And what does he do once he lands? He plants a vineyard, gets drunk, and then some weird sexual or whatever sin happens with his kids or his grandkids, it's just like, if you were making it up, right? Obviously Noah's the hero. This isn't the movie. This is the book, right? And in the book of Genesis, Noah is clearly the hero. Why would you include that part about how he got, like, there's no purpose it serves other than to say, this is like really embarrassing.
I mean, I'm going to play devil's advocate. If I was going to make up a story, I would definitely make the characters flawed, but I'd make it more believable.
You make it what?
More believable.
I didn't hear what you said. You make the characters
Flawed.
flawed.
Is that what they did in the ancient world though? Would they flaw characters to make them more believable, especially heroes and
I don't know. Achilles dies. I mean, Hercules fails in all his trials.
So here's the point. Here's the point. It's like you have flaws, right? But then you have what David did. Yeah, did you have a point?
I just want to know if I can get some pizza.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you.
Make it quick. We don't want you to miss the exciting part. Oh, it's right here. You don't have to leave the room.
Oh, no.
I didn't even see it arrive there. So like David's flaw is so heinous and so severe. It involves premeditated murder, adultery, lying, coveting, like basically all the 10 Commandments. He probably did it on the Sabbath day too. Like he basically breaks all the rules, right? And then what is the commandment of God from the prophet Nathan? It's that the same thing is going to happen to David, and what David did in secret is going to happen to him publicly, and it happens on the rooftop, doesn't it? Where his son Absalom goes into his concubines and in public, asserts his rulership over David. David, if you read David carefully, his whole life is basically miserable. He's hunted like a dog for most of it, and then at the last part of it, he's kicked out of his own kingdom. He lives in uncertainty. There's only this little tiny golden age when he brings the ark in. But even when he brings the ark in, his wife criticizes him, and he has marital disputes. Like, the guy just never caught a break, really. You look at Moses. I mean, God says, Moses, I want you to go lead my people. And Moses is like, no way. I am not leading your people. I can't even speak. Right? And God gets angry at Moses in Exodus chapter 3, right? Like he defeats all of Moses' excuses, and then Moses is at the end of it, he's like, just send somebody else. Like, this is the guy? This is Moses? This is the one Moses that's like no greater prophet has ever risen until the time of Christ than this 80-year-old inbred fugitive who says no to the call of God? This is the one? You know what I mean? Like, yeah, that's the one. Or Abraham. Abraham routinely lies and deceives other people, right? And he's very weak. He doesn't, but he does also have these remarkable moments of faith as well. He's like it's almost like he's a real person. I guess that's the point. It's not, obviously this is not a slam dunk because of Josiah's point, but it is a reason. And then the other one is, the other smaller point, I would say, is martyrdom. And on that one, I want you to read to me Hebrews 11:32 to 39. And then again, the question is, why die for a lie? When somebody dies for their faith, it doesn't tell you that what they believe is true.
32 to 39.
Yeah. What it tells you is that they're convinced it's true. In other words, if somebody thinks that there's an alien that told them to kill us all, and they kill us all, that doesn't mean that there's an alien. It just means that they're convinced that there is an alien. You know what I'm saying? So it's a gauge of sincerity, not of absolute truth. But even so, it's still a gauge. Go ahead, Talon, read that for us, please.
And what more shall I say? For time will fail me if I tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who by faith conquered kingdoms, performed acts of righteousness, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, from weakness were made strong, become mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight, Women received back their dead by resurrection, and others were tortured, not accepting their release, so that they might obtain a better resurrection. And others experienced mockings and scourgings, yes, also chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were tempted, they were put to death with the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, ill-treated, men of whom the world was not worthy, wandering in deserts and mountains, caves, holes in the ground. And all these, having gained approval through their faith, did not receive what was promised.
All right, so you have prophets versus mega pastors. I have, once in my life, attended the World Changer Dome with Creflo Dollar, and I heard him speak, and I witnessed his service, and I'm told he has a Rolls Royce and at least one private jet, you know, trying to get another one. And not just to single him out, there are many other mega pastors that, you know, it seems like, you know, and I'm not here to criticize and lambaste these people, but it seems like their lives are going pretty well. Just say from like a financial perspective, okay? So you could see why somebody might have incentive to want to become a mega pastor. Be like, I want to be a mega pastor. I want to be like Creflo Dollar when I grow up. I want to be like Joel Osteen when I grow up, because then I could have all these people that would love me and they would give me all their money and I could, whatever. You know, you can imagine somebody saying, I want to be like that. That's so contrasted to the prophets of the Bible. We just read a description. They're wandering around in sheepskins. You know, they're destitute, they're afflicted. Some of them are sawn in two, or at least one is sawn in two. To become a prophet of God is to have an experience in which God so interacts with you that you are a changed person, and or a prophetess too. We had those in the Bible, that you're different than everyone else. And if typically the prophet's message is to the king, it typically is negative. It's a terrible job. Pretty much nobody believes you most of the time. Everybody hates you. You know, especially somebody like Jeremiah. He's the least successful prophet in the whole Bible. And yet we get chapter after chapter after chapter of his life. Why in the world does he persist on the most unpatriotic message imaginable? The Babylonians are coming. They're going to win. Don't fight. Just give up. That's his message, right? What do? They beat him up. What do? They throw him in jail. What do? They make fun of him in the streets. And yet, Jeremiah is so convinced that God's speaking through him that he keeps going year after year after decade until finally it happens, just like he said. And then they still won't let him go. They kidnap him, bring him down to Egypt. It's like, what? So it's like you have a real lack of incentive to want to be a prophet and to write scripture. And second of all, these people are very frequently the ones that get targeted by the political regimes to suffer. All right? So that's just another consideration: martyrdom and suffering, office of a prophet, along with unflattering honesty. And now let's get to our big three topics. Yeah.
They will.
Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't get it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Let us take a look at the Sennacherib prism. I have handed it out to you. It's the first. It's the page on top there. What? It looks like this. Okay. Thank you. Can you read us that bold section there, Dan?
Yeah, sure. And then the king Hezekiah of Judah, who had not submitted to my yoke.
Hold on, I should say who's speaking. This is Sennacherib, king of Assyria. Go on.
All right.
Start over again.
All right. And then King Hezekiah of Judah, who had not submitted to my yoke, and I captured 46 of his strong cities and fortresses. and innumerable small cities which were around them, with the battering rams and the assault of engines and the attack of foot soldiers, and by mines and breaches I brought out there from 200,000 and 150 people, both small and great, male and female, and horses and mules and asses and camels and oxen and innumerable sheep I counted as spoil. Himself, like a caged bird, I shut up within Jerusalem, his royal city.
So this is Sennacherib, who's talking about Hezekiah. This is not in the Bible. This is a piece of stone or clay, some such thing, that is chiseled by the Assyrians to preserve a record of their own history. Look, if the Bible says Hezekiah struggled against Sennacherib, who came and surrounded the city and attacked it and everything else, that's one thing. But if you find it also in secular history, that's a whole other category, isn't it? I guess nobody else thinks it is. I think it is.
Why wouldn't you even take the Bible as, like, in the same manner as that other writing of stone? Like, as history as well to
Yeah.
investigate.
Right.
Well,
People are predisposed to be ultra skeptical or hyper skeptical about the Bible because the Bible makes huge claims, like that there is a God and he cares how you live. So if Sennacherib's prism happens to be true, it doesn't affect you. If the Bible happens to be true, you got to stop sleeping around. You got to be true to your wife. You got to tell the truth. You can't cheat on your taxes anymore. You can't cheat at your job anymore. You know, I mean, it has huge impact on your life. And I think for that reason, the Bible is often the number one thing
It's
attacked.
also an original copy. Like that's the,
Yeah. How old is it?
Well, if you flip over a couple more pages, you'll see that I have the slide that is in front of you is the first slide in your packet there. And maybe it says on there the date of this. Oh, it doesn't say on there. Well, Sennacherib is active, I think, in the 700s BC. Okay, so I would imagine that this comes from around that time. I don't know if it was recorded later, but somewhere around that time frame. So this is Sennacherib's prism. Let's flip over to the next one. You have the obelisk of Shalmaneser. Can somebody read to me the description, maybe like Jacob, for example, for the obelisk of Shalmaneser the third?
This black limestone
Obelisk.
depicts 5 kings conquered by Shalmaneser, the third king of Assyria, from 858 to 824 BC. Each side of the obelisk portrays the 5 kings and postures of submission to Shalmaneser, either in prostration to him or bringing tribute. The second is Jeshu of the house of Omri, king of Israel. This account is found only here. It is not recorded in the Bible.
All right, so here we have an artifact of the Assyrians that talks about Jehu. If you've ever read Kings, you've heard of Jehu. He's a more significant figure in the book of the Kings. It says in the fine print there, this obelisk does align with the biblical account of Jehu's later reign in 2 Kings 10:32-36, and provides the earliest known depiction of an Israelite. It also supplies evidence for their style of clothing worn in royal Israelite households. And it goes on to talk about his clothes a little bit. But here it is. Look, the Bible is not the kind of book that makes up mythology. It's the kind of book that records history. Okay, especially in the Old Testament, and we're in particular thinking about the historical books of the Old Testament as opposed to the prophetic books of the Old Testament. But even in the prophetic books of the Old Testament, they usually start by placing themselves in a setting. For example, Isaiah in the time of Uzziah, or usually the prophets identify who the king was. And so this is a secular, it's an external witness to the existence of Israelite kings, of Jehu in particular, and of his prostration to this Assyrian king. All right, next one up, Josiah, the Merneptah stele.
This engraved stone describes the victories of Egyptian pharaoh Merneptah over Libyan invaders. Various outlying groups of raiders banded together to attack Egypt near the end of the 13th century BC, but Merneptah defeated them.
You're going to name your kid Merneptah now, aren't you? Sorry. These cane jokes just never get old. They really don't.
I'm going to send that one to Dan right now.
The stele in the fine print there, could you read the fine print too?
Yep. The stele also seems to mention a victory over Israel, saying, Israel is a waste without grain. If so, this indicates that
Identifiable?
an identifiable Israelite population already existed in the late 13th century BC.
All right. So,
Kinda faded on my copy.
oh. Sorry about that. So again, this is a Egyptian. This is not Jewish or Israelitish. It's an old English word. Artifact. This is from Egypt, but it mentions Israel, saying that Israel is waste without grain. And so this would correlate to, I think, let me just think for a second, the time of the Judges. And there were instances in the time of the Judges when we read about how Israelite was without grain. For example, Midianites came in the time of Gideon, and he was threshing in a wine press. Why is he threshing in a wine press? Because the Midianites are stealing all the grain, so he's like hiding out in the wine press. So I don't know if this would corroborate Gideon directly, but we know of similar kinds of things around that time period. All right, Alex, the Mesha stele.
This engraved stone contains a royal inscription by Mesha, king of Moab, during the 9th century BC. It celebrates Mesha's victory over the son or descendant of Omri, probably
Joram.
There we go. You need to find print too?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Both of them?
Heck yeah. Let's do it, sister.
In boasting of his victories, Mesha gives glory to Chemosh, the
Chemosh.
chief god of the Moabite, and describes his looting of the temple vessels of Judah. The stele contains the earliest known reference to the name Yahweh outside the Old Testament.
Hello. Hello. So outside the Old Testament, now when does the Old Testament date? What's the oldest part of the Old Testament we have? No. I mean, that survives. Like the oldest, like going to a museum somewhere. What's the oldest? The Dead Sea Scrolls, which the earliest part of the Dead Sea Scrolls are dated to
250 BC.
very good, 250 BC. And this dates to the 9th century BC. Hello, 700 more years or 650 more years back in time, and yet Yahweh is there. Right? And Yahweh is associated with this king, a son of Omri, and they're speculating maybe it's Joram. What about the rest of that, Alex?
The stele supports the biblical account of events during Joram's reign of Israel. 2 Kings 3:21 and 27 describes the king of Moab offering his son as a sacrifice, after which great wrath came upon Israel. On the stele, Mesha credits his god,
Chemosh.
conquering his enemy.
So Mesha offers his son, or is it Joram offers his son? I'm not sure if that's a typo or if that's correct. But something happens there, and the result is the wrath of God comes in the form, usually, of a foreign invasion. And this stele is not Israelite. This is a Moabite, not a document, but a Moabite artifact.
The king of Moabite sacrificed his son and then beat Israel.
Okay.
Wow.
So the next time you want to, no.
Yeah.
The Cyrus cylinder. The Cyrus cylinder. Anybody know who Cyrus was?
Persian king?
Persian king. The Persians defeated what empire?
Greek.
The Greeks beat the Persians. What? Babylonian, right? So the Assyrians were the first empire in that region of great significance. I mean, I guess the Hittites before them, but the Assyrians, and then the Babylonians beat the Assyrians, and then the Persians beat the Babylonians, right? And so this is Cyrus the Great, as he's known to history, who defeated the Babylonians and told everyone they could go home, and that's what we read in Ezra chapter 1, when the people are sent home after 70 years in captivity. Brooke, could you read this for us?
Whoa. You can't do that. I already pre-read it and everything.
All right, why don't you read it, Jamie?
I'm just kidding.
We shouldn't be punished for preparing.
I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
It's in your hand. It's in your right hand right now, where the thumb was. One more. There it is.
The Cyrus cylinder.
Isn't this stuff cool? I mean, they dug this out of the earth thousands of years later. And then think about the people that figured out how to read this. I mean, look at these symbols.
Justin could probably read it.
This ancient clay cylinder.
I don't know. It's a different language than what he studied. He could probably read the Mesha stele, the last one we had, if he took a really long time, because it's in Paleo Hebrew, which is they use different shapes for the letters, but they're the same as the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. All right, go ahead.
This ancient clay cylinder dates from the 6th century BC and contains a declaration from Cyrus the Great. The first section describes Cyrus' greatness and mercy, common theme from such declarations. The second section, composed of Cyrus' own words, describes how he returned captive people and their gods to their native lands. It also records his hope that all the returned gods will intercede before Bel and Nabu, the chief Babylonian gods, on his behalf. The description of Cyrus' mercy and efforts to return captives supports the biblical account of Israel's restoration from exile. See Ezra.
Ezra chapter 1. Yeah, Ezra chapter 1 begins with the declaration of Cyrus to return to the land. Look, the Bible is not a made-up book. It's a book that interweaves and interlocks with history, and it leaves a trail behind because there are actual people, and actual people cannot exist without leaving a trail behind. We invent things like styrofoam cups and... No, that's a different sermon. Because when we build things, they're left behind, and we have history, and it's left behind. And this is one of those things. Take a look at the next one, the Amarna letters. And Jamie can read this one because it's more her. It'll be more of a challenge for her, so that's good.
I see some words on my now.
Yeah. Well, let's make up a pronunciation for the Egyptian king. Or the city. Akhetaten. Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
This collection of cuneiform tablets is named after the place they were discovered, modern Amarna, the ancient Egyptian city of Akhetaten, written in the late 14th century BC. These letters record correspondence.
Hold on, let's just pause for a second. 14th century BC. I mean, there's old, and then there's just crazy, stupid old. And this is like, what's that?
Is that during
The
the Middle Kingdom?
Middle Kingdom?
Egypt.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know Egyptian history that well.
The Exodus was.
Yeah. But I would say from a biblical chronology, this is like really early. I don't know if it's like patriarchal or what, but it's pretty early.
Wouldn't it be 15th century for the exile? I don't know.
All right, sorry, keep going.
Okay, these letters record correspondence between Egypt. I really don't want to read those names.
Tutankhamun, come on. He's like the one everybody knows. King Tut, yeah.
Oh, it's King Tut. And its vassal states. They provide information about trade and government of the time.
Can you imagine that being an ancient civilization and writing your letters into clay? It's like I just got an email. Here comes a guy. He's like, puts it down. All right, keep going, Jamie.
I would, but I can't actually read it.
What?
I can't read it.
Oh, you can't?
Yeah.
It's pretty hard to read.
All right.
Our Armana letters
yeah.
in the biblical text describe the land of
Canaan.
and Canaan. Similarity. Both indicate that I cannot say that word. Canaan, okay. Has several territories, various kings and chariots that served as the means of military control. The Amarna letters describe the city of
Shechem.
Shechem as a dangerous place full of political intrigue. The Book of Judges does the same at a later date. The Amarna letters also show that the kingdoms of Canaan were under military pressure from nomadic tribes.
Interesting, huh? And I guess they were all shapes and sizes, these letters. But it shows you that there were such places and there were interesting things happening. I don't know, I would say this is kind of like a lesser significant archaeological find for biblical veracity. Look at the next one, the Babylonian Chronicles. Jesse.
Babylonian Chronicles are a series of clay tablets inscribed with Babylonian history. They were written at different times, beginning around the 6th century BC. They narrate events beginning in the 8th century BC and cover nearly 500 years of history. Some describe events of biblical history, including
Jehoiakim?
King Jeho refusal to pay tribute in 2 Kings 24:1. Nebuchadnezzar's siege of Jerusalem in 2 Kings 24:10-11, and Jehoiachin's capture in 2 Kings 24:12.
One of these, the Nabonidus Chronicle, describes the reign and downfall of the last king before Cyrus, Nabonidus. This tablet also mentions that Nabonidus had a regent, his son, Belshazzar, the Belshazzar of the book of Daniel. The banquet described in Daniel presumably took place during Belshazzar's regency when Nabonidus was away from Babylon in Daniel chapter 5. So, I mean, here you have an old piece of clay with notches cut out of it, but somebody was able to figure out what it said. Well, actually, there's a whole bunch of them, I guess. They're the Chronicles. And it mentions stuff. You know, I mean, it's not going to mention Israelite stuff that much because it focuses on Babylon. But when Israelite stuff mentions Babylonian stuff like Daniel and Babylon, that sort of thing, it is going to show up. Then you have the Lachish ostraca and the Tel Dan stele. We'll flip to the Tel Dan stele because that one Jesse's going to like. This engraved stone is the only archaeological evidence of King David to be discovered. It reads Bet David or whatever, House of David, as in Isaiah 7:2. The stele dates to the mid-9th century BC and was found in Dan's city wall in 1993. David, I think we date to like the 10th century. So, you know, you already have his name in the 9th, and it's not even just his name, it's the House of David. So it's an established dynasty already by that time. And then flip over a couple more. We're going to skip the Pontius Pilate. That's a New Testament thing. Skip over to the inscription from Hezekiah's tunnel. There's a little bit there. We could look at that some other time. And then up to the bowls of Darius and Artaxerxes. Pretty cool there, right? They talk about Darius, the great king. The Bible also mentions Darius in the books of Ezra, Nehemiah, and Artaxerxes as well. And then we have some other, what's that?
Is this an online resource somewhere? It seems like, did you put all this?
No. On the first page, the person who put it together and sent it to me, I give, you know, I left that so you would see who did it. Yeah. Yeah. But this is actually from Carbell Multimedia. So, Logos Bible software. So it's part of Logos if you have Logos or want to get Logos. And then you have some coins, you know, just flipping through here. Coins of the Gospels, that's a New Testament thing. And, you know, I mean, it's just like everything's leaving a trail. Human civilizations leave trails, and the Bible, it talks about a human civilization. So, of course, it's going to leave that kind of a trail behind. Also, in the Building Belief book, as Jesse pointed out, a number of these things are mentioned as well. What page is that? 136? All right, so there's even more in there. Yeah, kind of. A lot of it is the same kind of stuff. All right, so that's archaeology. I just wanted to show you those things. These things corroborate the Bible. There are many other archaeological finds, like actual cities that they found, like Jericho or the old city of David within Jerusalem, that sort of thing. I want to move to medical insights now because that's probably something that you have no training in, and it's actually quite significant, and then move on to predictive prophecy. So I'm not going to actually write down all those archaeological finds. You have them in that printed out slideshow. So yeah. I mean, it's open notes. So if I give you a handout, then that's fair game as well. All right, so let's move on to medical insights. You have that other article there, Scientific Foreknowledge and Medical Acumen of the Bible. You do, right?
Yeah.
Talon has it.
It's right after the.
All right. Everybody's good? Everybody's happy?
It's written by the same guy who did the tire process.
Yeah, Kyle Butt.
Well, it stood out.
There's 2 T's in it. Okay. Sometimes you get a little tickle and it's hard to not laugh. All right, so his points are absolutely fantastic. Take a look at this. In the middle paragraph there, talks about the first 5 books of the Old Testament are a product of Moses as a matter of historical record. The point he makes in the middle there is that Moses had been trained under the most advanced Egyptian educational system of his day. And he leans on Stephen. Brother Stephen in Acts 7 said that all the wisdom of the Egyptians, that Moses had been educated in. And that makes sense, right? I mean, if Moses really was adopted by Pharaoh's daughter, of course he had an Egyptian education, which is fantastic for our point. Our point is that the books that Moses later wrote actually contain medical insights that there's no way he could have known, considering his own historical context, being raised in the Egyptian context. All right, next page. It will cure you if it doesn't kill you first. Melvin, could you read for us that paragraph there? A nice big long paragraph.
Among the ancient documents that detail much of the Egyptian medical knowledge, the Ebers
Papyrus.
Papyrus ranks as one of the foremost sources. This papyrus was discovered in 1872 by a German Ethiopiologist named Ebers, the name from which the papyrus acquired its moniker. Ancient Egyptian, 1930, page 1. It consists of a host of medical remedies purported to heal, enhance, and prevent. Altogether, 811 prescriptions are set forth in the papyrus, and they take the form of slaves, plasters, and omelets, poultices, snuffs, inhalations, and gargles, drops, infections, and pills, fumigations, suppositories, and enatma, page 15. Among the hundreds of prescriptions, disgusting treatments that cause much more harm than good can be found. For instance, under a section titled What to Do to Draw Out Splinters in the Flesh, a remedy is prescribed consisting of worm blood, mold, and donkey dung. Page 73, Doctors S.I. McMillan and David Stern note that dung is loaded with tetanus spores, and a simple splinter often results in a gruesome death from lockjaw. Page 2000, page 10. Remedies to help heal skin diseases include such prescriptions as a false tooth, cat's dung, dog
A farmer's urine. Now, if it's a construction worker, that's not going to work. You need a farmer's urine, not some banker. Okay, he needs to be a hard-working farmer. And then when he pees, that stuff's really going to be good. To cure whatever. What's it to cure?
One recipe to prevent hair growth included lizard dung and blood from a cow, donkey, pig, dog, and stag, page 102. While it must be noted that some of the Egyptian medicine actually did include prescriptions and remedies that could be helpful, harmful remedies and ingredients cast a sickening shadow of untrustworthiness over the entire Egyptian endeavor as viewed by the modern reader.
All right, Denise, take over, please.
As medical doctor S.P. Massengale stated, the early Egyptian physicians made considerable use of drugs. Their drugs were of the kind usually found in early civilizations. A few effective remedies lost in a massive substance of superstitious origin. They used opium, squill, and other vegetable substances, but also excrement and urine. It is said that the urine of a faithful wife would have been effective in the treatment of sore eyes.
That's right. That's right. You need a faithful wife. You get one of those cheating women, and that urine is not going to help your eyes.
Why would you want to put pee in your eyes in the first place? That's just.
It's Egypt, baby. I mean,
Egypt's the master. Dude, the life force from a pure woman's urine is kidding me.
all right.
How do you know if they're pure? What if they're telling you that they haven't cheated on you?
Well, that would be proof that they're not a faithful wife.
They're presumably bad.
I wonder how many wives got in trouble with that.
It's like, I'm serious.
But what if you're faithful and it's still burning? It's gonna burn no matter what. It's your eyes. Your eyes are
It's the
sensitive.
healing of it.
All right. Well, I think we all agree that this is pretty crazy. But here's the simple fact. Here's the punchline. This Ebers papyrus that's giving us all this information about ancient Egyptian medical practice was or would have been the standard that Moses should have learned when he was in Egypt.
You didn't even make it to pus.
And so
Oh, don't say
And so if Moses was writing out of his own knowledge when he was generating the book of Leviticus in particular, which is the book that talks about what to do when somebody has a skin infection, what to do if somebody touches a dead body, and so on, we would find potions like what we see in the Ebers papyri. But instead, there's a shocking absence of any kind of, I don't know, harmful remedy. It's kind of a contradiction. Keep going, Denise. I cut you off there.
Sorry.
I know you really want to get to the pus part.
In addition, it seems that the Egyptians were among the first to present the idea of good and laudable pus. Due to the idea that infection was good and the pus that resulted from it was a welcomed effect.
Why are you judging their culture?
Well-meaning doctors, I don't like the word pus. Well-meaning doctors killed millions by deliberately infecting their wounds. Needless to say, the modern-day reader would not want to be a patient in an Egyptian clinic.
I think I heard a statistic one time where I think Egyptians doctors killed like 10 or 15 times more people than they actually helped.
All right, this is one more paragraph, Denise.
Okay. The first 5 books of the Old Testament, admittedly, are not devoted entirely to the enumeration of medical prescriptions. They are not ancient medical textbooks. These books do, however, contain numerous regulations for sanitation, quarantine, and other medical procedures that were to govern the daily lives of the Israelite nation. Missing entirely from the pages of these writings are the harmful remedies and ingredients prescribed by other ancient civilizations. In fact, the Pentateuch exhibits an understanding of germs and disease that much modern medicine did not grasp for 3,500 years after the books were written.
All right. So the big point about the Ebers papyrus, again, is that Moses, we don't see any sort of remedies like that in the Old Testament, which you would expect if somebody had been trained in Egypt prior to writing those books. Now, here's the next point. I've got 4 points here. Life is in the blood, cleansing after touching dead bodies, quarantine, and food laws. Okay? All of these things are completely obvious to you. Common sense. But they were not to ancient people. As we just read, they're fussing about farmers' urine and the urine of a faithful wife and trying to figure out if she's really faithful if the urine didn't actually fix your eyes instead of actually doing things that would work. So the point that he makes here, and that many other people have made as well, on blood is that the Old Testament says the life is in the blood. Okay? And yet, up until at least the time of George Washington, bloodletting was fairly common. And that's where they would cut in a blood vessel and let the bad blood out when you were sick. Now let me ask you a question. If you're sick, is it helpful or harmful to bleed a lot? All right. You and I know that. They didn't know that. Right? What's that?
Get that bad blood out of you.
And so ancient Israelites never practiced that because the life is in the blood, so you're not going to bleed out your life. It doesn't make any sense. On the next page, you have germs, labor, fever, and biblical sanitation. This is all very good if you want to read it. I read it again today. It's all about this Viennese doctor, Semmelweis, who was running a clinic to give birth, not himself, but for women to go to give birth. And the mortality rate was just phenomenal. It was 18% of the women who came to his clinic died. Gave birth, but then died themselves. And he couldn't figure it out. He's like, you know what it is? I think it's these monks ringing these bells nearby, and it's scaring the women, and it's killing the women. So he told the monks, you guys got to stop ringing those bells. Didn't work. They still kept dying. He's like, maybe the problem is that they're lying on their back. I'll have them lie on their side. He had all the women lie on their sides. They still died at just the same rate, while they're giving birth and whatnot, Now, this is the crazy thing. If you gave birth at home, which the rich women in their society would give birth at home, this is a couple hundred years ago, and the poor people would give birth in the hospital. And so if you're a rich person, you give birth at home with a midwife, it's only 3% chance of dying. Right? But if you go into the hospital, it's 18%. It's driving this guy nuts. He's like, why are they all dying? And then skip down to, it's like 3 or 4 paragraphs down where it says, as he contemplated. You see where I'm at? It says, as he contemplated this dilemma, he watched young medical students perform their routine tasks. Each day, the students would perform autopsies on the dead mothers. Then they would rinse their hands in a bowl of bloody water, wipe them off on a common shared towel, and immediately begin internal examinations of the still living women. That guarantees pretty much a transmission of whatever killed the last person to the living person, right? And this is in the 1800s, 1847, right? This is not thousands of years ago. These people consider themselves modern, right? And they had an incredible massive knowledge already. Even in our own time, 2015, the medical industry is really still in its infancy. It's my own personal opinion. But these people thought they were rather sophisticated, and yet they couldn't grasp the idea that if you can't see a contaminant on your hands, it could still be there, right? Because you rubbed it off with a towel, right? You don't have to change your clothes or anything. You rub it off. There's nothing on my hands, right? They didn't understand germs yet. And so what he ended up doing is he innovated and had his doctors wash in chlorine. And it dropped from 18% to 1%. And nobody believed him. It took years and years and years for the rest of the society to pick it up because they thought he was just crazy. Anyhow, what we have in the scriptures is a commandment. Look on the next page over. The second paragraph there said, has Semmelweis made a groundbreaking discovery, or is it possible that he simply rediscovered what had been known in some circles for many years? Almost 3,300 years before Semmelweis lived, Moses had written, this is a direct quote from the Bible in Leviticus, I believe, he who touches the dead body of anyone shall be unclean 7 days. He shall purify himself with water on the 3rd day and on the 7th day, and he will be clean. But if he does not purify himself on the 3rd day and on the 7th day, he will not be clean. Suddenly you're like, whoa, those weird laws in the Old Testament, maybe they actually really did something, right? And the next page, or the same page, the water of purification, he goes on to describe what that potion was, if for lack of a better word. Basically what it was ashes from a red heifer, cedar, scarlet dyed wool, and hyssop. which just sounds like a bunch of random stuff that like a witch would put together and like, you know, but that's, it's a little more sophisticated than that. The way you make lye is you pass water through ashes, right? Hyssop contains an antiseptic. Cedar leaves and twigs are rich in vitamin C, and they can have antiviral, anti-inflammatory, and antibacterial properties. And the wool fibers would make it basically into an ancient equivalent of lava soap. So, you know, this sort of like, whatever you want to call it, concoction of purification that they used on the third and then the seventh day actually could have physically done something to cleanse them, right? What did they do? They touched a dead body. So now they're outside the camp, they're unclean for 7 days. On the third day they wash, on the seventh day they wash. Now they come back in the camp.
Why do you think there was such a great amount of time of 3 days and the 7 days?
Do you think it's sick?
Probably, yeah. I mean, it doesn't take like 3 days for most things to really get to you.
Sure that they weren't already infected.
Yeah, yeah, probably. And you know, in ancient times, you know, you'd be walking along, and they don't have the same kind of systems we have. So like, you'd be walking along, you might see a dead body on the ground, right? And the ancient Jewish mindset was, we need to bury this person. We need to give this person an honorable burial. So they would dig a hole and they would bury the person, but then they would be unclean. So now they have to go outside for 7 days, outside of their regular dwelling. And also when they get home from battle. In battle, you don't shoot with guns, right? You've got swords, you've got spears, you've got knuckles, you know what I mean? And there's blood everywhere, right? And so you're going to go home and then spend time with your family right after that. What if that guy had the plague or some other sickness or smallpox or whatever? You know what I mean? Now, if you're outside the camp, you know, the whole thing has a genius to it that doesn't make sense considering the time when it was written. You know, even if you assume liberal theories for authorship, it still doesn't make any sense. As late as 1847, washing hands was ridiculed as actually doing anything, right? So, and then the next, so that's cleansing. Quarantine, that's a lot to do with leprosy, skin infections, right? There's a lot in Leviticus about this, where the priest's job was to examine the skin, see how it was doing, quarantine it, and look at this one statement. This is Leviticus 13:45. This is all in the article, which you can read at your leisure if you're so inclined. The leprous person who has the disease shall wear torn clothes and let the hair of his head hang loose, and he shall cover his upper lip and cry out, unclean, unclean. If you cover your upper lip, you're blocking germs, aren't you? It's like, how would they know that, right? And you know, why do you need all these signs and everything else? So everyone else knows this dude has a highly infectious skin disease that could kill you, right? And so it's just like one of these things that like people might make fun of. They'll be like, why is he covering his upper lip or his? Actually, I think in the Hebrew it says his mustache. Let's see how. Yeah. Yeah, if he shall cover his mustache and cry, unclean, unclean. Like, why cover your mustache? Well, because you also have to cover your mouth if you cover your Go ahead and cover your mustache. Oh, there you go. Like that. So that's quarantine. And then we get to the laws. We get to the food laws here. Okay, now the food laws are totally fascinating. They did all these tests. There's this guy, I don't remember his name, but he did all these tests with these seedlings where he tried to plant little seeds in meat juice from different animals to see which ones would it would seed well, you know, it would turn into a seedling well, and which ones it would take a longer time compared to regular dirt, you know. And he found that all these things, that animals that the Bible calls clean, like the ox, had a 91% growth rate, or sheep juices was 94%, a calf was 82%, a goat was 90%, a deer was 90%, but then he put it into the meat juice of a pig and it was 54%, or of a rabbit, 49%, camel, 41%, horse, 39%. So why is it that and basically this is measuring toxic levels, right? The toxins in these animals is higher than toxins in these other animals. It has to do with I'm sure it has to do with just like how the animals are made. For example, with with pigs, they're scavengers, right? So pigs just like basically eat anything, doesn't matter if it's alive or if it's dead, and those toxins get into the meat. And to this day, pigs are injected with nitrates, aren't they? Isn't that pork? That's, yeah. To prevent this, what do they call that? Trichonitis or something? Yeah. Yeah, trichinosis. So this is sort of like known in our modern times, like we've developed strategies to fight against it. But in a pre-refrigeration world where food doesn't always get cooked all the way, it's just safer to say, hey, no pig. You know what I mean? And so I'm not saying you can't eat bacon. But what I am saying is that there might have been some significant, it's almost as if, I don't know, God gave them the laws. That's all I'm trying to say. Am I being too radical for this campus here? Fins and scales is the next section here. They talk about the blowfish and how it's 1,250 times more deadly than cyanide, the poison in a blowfish. A tiny amount of a blowfish poison can kill 30 adults. And so can an ancient Israelite eat blowfish? Needs to have fins and scales, right? So they're automatically protected against that. They're automatically protected against shellfish like oysters that can contain this naturally occurring bacteria. And according to the FDA, 50% of people who are infected with this bacteria, sometimes found in oysters that are undercooked, die. So you don't want to eat undercooked oysters, right? Israelites didn't eat any oysters. Why? Because they don't have fins or scales. And that was one of the laws for clean and unclean. Then he goes on to talk about reptiles. Reptiles carry salmonella very easily for whatever reason. The CDC estimates over 70,000 cases of human salmonella infection each year related to handling reptiles and amphibians. That's from 2007. As high as 90% of reptiles are natural carriers of salmonella bacteria. Well, look at this. Now these are, to you, the unclean among the swarming things. I'm going to go to a little easier to read version here. Now these are unclean to you among the swarm, says exactly the same thing, that swarm on the ground. The mole rat, the mouse, the great lizard of any kind, the gecko, the monitor lizard, the sand lizard, and the chameleon. These are unclean to you among all that swarm. Whoever touches them when they are dead shall be unclean until the evening. Unclean people have to wash, right? And anything on which any of them falls when they are dead shall be unclean, whether it is an article of wood or a garment or a skin or a sack, any article that is used for any purpose, it must be put into water. It shall be unclean until the evening, and then it shall be clean. And it goes on to describe a little bit more, like if it hits a clay pot or something like that. Well, it turns out that reptiles that, for you to pick up the salmonella, it doesn't have to touch your hand. It could touch something else, and then you can eat that thing, whatever it is. You know what I mean? So it doesn't necessarily have to be just eating the reptile. It could be touching something, and then the reptile could touch it, and then you could touch it after that. And that's what he talks about in here. And then the last category, he gets into the pork a little later. That's when he gets into it. But the last category is the bats. The Bible says don't eat bats. Bats have this incredibly high rate of rabies. So, you just kind of look at these different things. Why in the world would it, why in the world would it get so many things right if it's merely a human invention? Like, how would they know all this? People don't know this in the ancient world, right? Yeah, you have a question?
Okay, question about the amphibians carrying this, that that's not true, is it? Can I touch so many frogs and fish in my life and never have sick?
Girl, that's from the CDC, Center for Disease Control. That's not me.
Touching turtles.
I touched so many fish, so many frogs and touched them.
This is not frogs. This is talking about reptiles. Look. CDC report is, I think this is, the CDC recommends that homes with children under 5 should not have reptiles as pets. Furthermore, they noted as high as 90% of reptiles are natural carriers of salmonella, harboring strains specific to reptiles without any symptoms of disease in the reptile. While it is true that many pets can carry salmonella, the problem with reptiles, and apparently amphibians, is that they carry salmonella with such high frequency. It is prudent to assume that all reptiles and amphibians can be a potential source of salmonella. So they all aren't, but it's prudent to assume they are, and then what do? You wash your hands. I mean, it's not like it gets into your skin or something. It's just if you lick your hands after the frog peed on you, you might have a problem. You know what I mean? So there you have it. I'm not claiming any expertise here. I'm just reading what the CDC is saying and these other sources are saying. Last one that I have forgotten to write down on our list was circumcision, all right? Circumcision, it turns out, circumcision is surgery, right? And it turns out that in order to perform surgery, you need the blood to clot, right? And excessive bleeding is caused by a decreased level of prothrombin, which in turn is caused by insufficient levels of vitamin K, okay? So flip over to the page that says conclusion on it, and I'll read you right on the top there about that. But that prothrombin, that has to do with blood clotting, right? In chart form, Holt Pediatrics, you see where I'm at? On the last page it says conclusion, illustrates that the percent of available prothrombin in newborn dips from about 90% of normal on its day of birth to about 35% on its third day of life outside the womb. After the third day, the available prothrombin begins to climb. By the 8th day of the child's life, the available prothrombin level is approximately 110% of normal, about 20% higher than it was on the first day and about 10% more than it will be during the child's life. Such data prove that the 8th day is the perfect day on which to perform a major surgery such as circumcision. That's insane. Come on. Look at that little quote there in the middle. Modern medical textbooks sometimes suggest that the Hebrews conducted careful observations of bleeding tendencies. Yet what is the evidence? Severe bleeding occurs at most only in 1 out of 200 babies. Determining the safest day for circumcision would have required careful experiments, observing thousands of circumcisions. Could Abraham, a primitive desert-dwelling nomad, have done that? He's got one kid, right? At the time of the circumcision, it's just Ishmael, right? Like, he's going to circumcise his kid and, like, observe him, be like, well, actually, his kid was a few years older. But, like, the first baby was probably Isaac that he circumcised, and he just got lucky, I guess, right? To pick the 8th day. And so, I mean, it's just like, you see this wisdom, these, like, weird medical insights or scientific insights, and you're like, how in the world did they get there unless there is a God behind it? All right. So I'm already way past my time, and we need to do predictive prophecy, all right? I'm just going to say 2 things about it. We've got Daniel 9, and we've got Tyre. Those are my 2 points. I'm going to say them right now. Daniel 9 makes the point that the Messiah will be cut off. This is like Ebonics. Messiah be cut off. And Tyre is in Ezekiel prophecy, that Tyre would be destroyed. Let me make sure that will equip you well enough to... Okay. I did want to make one other point about archaeology. Archaeology is not a hard science. You know what I'm saying? It's not like physics. It's not like chemistry. Archaeology is, the actual digging of something. That's obviously very, developed at this point. But saying what it means, dating it, and all that kind of stuff, that is based on interpretation. So it's a soft science in the sense that they do change their interpretation of, like, when the Cyrus cylinder, was originally written or something like that. But it's based on hard evidence. And I think it's important to keep that clear, because a lot of times you'll come across an archaeological discovery and they'll be like, oh, this disproves this. And then 50 years later, they're like, actually, we found some more stuff, and it was really this over here that disproved that instead. You know what I mean? Now, the actual ostraca or artifact or whatever they find is hard. That's hard evidence. The question is, how do you interpret that? How do you fit it into the timeline? So that's my point on archaeology being a soft science. All right, we'll take a quiz, and then I'll come back, and we've got to talk about Tyre at least a little bit. Whoa. Damn. Saw those eyes looking up here, man. If you didn't write it down by now, then it's too late. Okay, when you finish with the quiz, put it next to the last piece of pizza. And somebody please eat it so it doesn't smell up the room for tomorrow.